Hello and welcome to Access Chat. We've got a full roster for you today. We've got Timo Stollenwerh, Mike Gifford and Susanna Laurin. And we don't normally have a triumvirate of guests, so welcome all. Susanna, we've had you on multiple times. You're now the Chief Research Officer for Funka. Mike, again, we've had you on and we've been talking about Drupal accessibility, and I think today, the topic is about accessibility in authoring tools. And Timo, would you care to tell us about where you've come from and how you got involved in accessibility? That would be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm Timo. I'm from Bonn in Germany, and I'm a Plone core developer since more than 10 years. Plone is an open source content management system written in Python. It's used a lot in governments and universities. So accessibility is and has been always a very important topic, and a base requirement basically for all our projects that we have. And yeah, we recently started to join Mike and Susanna in this Funka-led project about accessibility to improve accessibility of authoring tools, right? And this is how we got together. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Susanna, you approached us about this a while back, and I was very excited because I know how important, and also with talking with Mike, how important the impact of authoring tools are on the accessibility of content for the web. But can you tell us about how the project came about and what it contains, or the intent of it is?
Yeah, it's actually kind of two-part project. So we did a pre-project first, or a pilot as it's called in European funding, where we had an idea that web accessibility can be enhanced or could be more successful if the authoring tools could provide some kind of accessibility by default. And when we managed to prove our point by doing some research, then we got the opportunity to go to the next phase where you actually do things. So that's where we are now, and that is when we built this cluster of leading web accessibility tool providers in Europe and work together with them. So it's not only Mike and Timo, but also other partners in the project. And we try to work together to make sure that we can provide accessibility features by default in authoring tools that will then, we will make prototypes and test them. And if they are good enough, which I hope, then they will be presented to the world so that all authoring tools on the market can use these features and thereby help web authors to create accessible content in an easier way. So one of the reasons we really want to do this, and the reason the Commission is funding it, is that we have shown in research, and I think this is also something known to others, that more than 50% of the accessibility problems in websites are created by humans, by the web authors, because they normally are not accessibility experts. So we now have approximately 7 million interfaces in Europe that are covered by the new legislation. And even if we as accessibility experts, we would be happy to train all these people. I mean, that would be really good for us because we would have things to do for like a million years or so, but it just won't scale. If we need to train all these authors to do the right thing, we will not succeed. So something needs to be automated, and the tools really need to help all these authors that are not accessibility experts. That's sort of the key idea in this.
Excellent. So I think that we see this in our daily lives all the time. We can work on the structure of a website. We can produce a framework that is, for the most part, accessible, and then you hand it over to people to maintain it, and they throw up a whole bunch of inaccessible content. And we can't expect them to be experts, like we don't expect them to be security experts. Why do we expect people that are creating content to necessarily understand this in depth? We need to provide the tools, absolutely. And sorry, Antonio,
Yeah, you are mentioning people who are building websites, but today many people are independent bloggers. They write their own content. They do that actively, and they also need to make their content accessible. So it's really interesting to see something like this happen, because this will help to democratize access.
It was really interesting though to look at the Web 8 Million study and to see how so much the web has gotten less accessible over the last year, and that's really a discouraging thing for those of us who are passionate about accessibility. But there were a few exceptions to that, and Drupal, Joomla, and Gatsby were three of the systems that actually had a significant difference between this year and last year in terms of the amount of the number of accessibility errors that were caught on the homepage. And I know that part of that, at least in the Drupal instances, is because of the work that has been done on fixing these problems and changing the culture around accessibility in the Drupal community. But also that we've built authoring tools that make it harder to just forget the alt text on images, or to put multiple H1 tags into your text because that's the size you'd like it to be. There's all kinds of slip-ups that authors make, and we were in a great position to try and bring in a bunch of A-tag requirements. A-tag is the authoring tool accessibility guidelines, and we brought a number of those recommendations into Drupal 8 to try and make it as easy as possible for authors to do the right thing. And we haven't done enough with it because it's something that takes a lot of time and effort to change the authoring interface to support authors better. But something that's really incredibly valuable in the long term, especially if you're dealing with millions of websites that need to have accessible content.
I want to maybe take the conversation back a step, if that's okay. And first of all, I know that when we send everybody home, a lot of countries send everybody home to work from home. That's when we really saw a lot of the accessibility gaps that we've all been talking about. We also, I know in the States, I hear all the time from corporations complaining that the accessibility experts in the United States, that we're expecting them to solve a technological problem in a manual way, and that doesn't work with these gigantic organizations. But I know who y'all are, but I want to make sure our audience knows, because maybe they didn't see the episodes that you were on before. So can we just take a minute to reintroduce who you are? I mean, Mike, I know you're helping with projects. Susanna, you're helping with this project, but can we just back up for a second and do some quick introductions of who you are and why you're involved in this project? And then my question would be is, once again, how are we not, I mean, I think it's such a good idea, but I know it seems to me that some vendors might really want to fuss about the way that you're going. But I actually believe that what I've heard so far, and I got an email about it today, that the steps that you're taking, it seems very logical to me. And I think this is actually a very powerful thing that you're doing and that we all need to get behind, which is why I'm glad we're supporting you on Access Chat. But just, I just want to make sure everybody knows who you are, if you don't mind. So let's start with Susanna, and then maybe Mike and Timo. You can just give a quick little introduction about who you are, and then we'll make sure the episode you were on before, that we put that on in the marking so that people can go back and listen to those episodes as well. So Susanna.
Yeah, so I am the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at a small consultancy in Europe called Funka. I have been involved in the accessibility world for 20 years or more. And I'm currently doing a lot of work for the European Commission. I have been leading the WebEx subgroup, which is the Web Accessibility Directive expert group. And I do a lot of strategic consulting for national governments in the member states. And I'm also very much into trying to scale accessibility to actually work in real time, because with the Web Accessibility Directive, we have a new push for accessibility, but much of the things that we have been doing during the years is very manual and very high quality, and that doesn't really help the immature markets. So I think we believe we need to do both. We need to be very strategic, but we also need to be very hands-on, and that's where the automation comes in my view.
So, President and CEO of OpenConcept Consulting, we're a web development company that specializes in Drupal, but we've been doing a lot of work on accessibility. I've been the Drupal 8 accessibility maintainer now for, well, I've been spearheading accessibility for the last decade in the Drupal community, and really believe in fixing the problem at the source, and that there's so much that can be done in any project, any software project, to fix the problems upstream, to identify what they are and to address those. And we've done a lot of work looking at the technological fixes that can be made. And we're now looking more and more at the bigger organizational issues. How do we fix that? How do we look at procurements? How do we look at the culture within organizations? How do we change those so that we can really begin to value accessibility and not see it just as a technological system, but amongst many other systems that organizations need to work with?
I think that's a really good point, Mike. Accessibility is both a technical thing, but also an attitudinal and organizational, cultural issue that we need to solve. We can teach people the how to and give them the technical skills, but we still need to change the way that we do business, change our processes, look at the whole totality of the business ecosystem if we want to get this right. That's going to take us a while, to be honest, but I'm glad that you're on board with this and you're looking at it from the right end and looking to do this systematically rather than rather than fixing the broken output. Does anyone have ideas about what are the things that we can do to address some of these systemic issues? Because I think that there are a number.
I think in my mind it's no, go ahead.
No.
So for me, accessibility is is one part of a greater ecosystem or problem, because modern web projects are incredibly complex because you have so many different ways how you can structure content or requirements, for instance, right? I mean, we have this legislation now, so all web projects that we do in the government's sector or in for universities needs to be accessible, but they also need, for instance, so all our clients need, for instance, a consistent corporate design, right? Because the designer put a lot of effort into the design and they want consistent corporate design. They also want a system that's really easy to use, right? So both the front end and the editing back end, right? So they have the training costs are low, right? And when we started to kind of reinvent Plone, which was in the market for more than 10 or 15 years, and we took a step back and thought about okay, how are we going to solve that problem, or all those problems at the same time that we have in every single project that we do. We kind of came with the idea, or the only thing that was a solution, at least in my mind or in the mind of our colleagues, was to radically simplifying things, how we do things, right? For instance, in the editing environment, we used to have very powerful editors that could do everything, right? So you could do a headline that could be green or whatever, right? And what we saw in projects was that in most of our projects, we stripped down the options that the users had, most options that did not make much sense, right? And that helped us to maybe put more focus on what matters on those web projects, and also reduce the complexities on all those levels, right? Accessibility, corporate design, and everything. And that helped us a lot, at least in our projects, to in a certain sense, to simplify things, to being able to tackle all those different different requirements that we have, right? And bring everything together, because you can't tackle accessibility on its own, right? Because it's not, as said, it's not a technical problem only, right? It's a question like how you write, who writes, like how easy like also the authoring environment is, which is like what the Funka project is about, right? So it's all connected, and it's and in the end it's a very complex problem, right, that we have to solve. And the more options that we give, the more complex this problem becomes, right? So our solution was to simplify things and make the system easier to use for everybody, right?
Can you tell us about your roadmap and what you have planned in there? So
you mean like the technical roadmap? So I guess I have to like give a bit of background, right? So Plone is a like, yeah, as said, a Plone, an open source content management system like Typo 3, Drupal, you name it. And they all were server-side rendered, right? So you had your programming language like PHP, Python, Java, whatever. It renders the page and it delivers the page, right? And then like a few years ago, like 4 to 5 years ago, like web technology shifted, right? Driven by companies like Google or Facebook that publish like large open source or JavaScript frameworks. And nowadays, web development happens a lot in the browser, right? So we have this, yeah, a lot of the computation or what happens in a modern website happens actually on the browser in JavaScript, right? So what we saw in recent years in all CMS, open source CMSs and commercial CMSs and all web-based systems was that they started to write modern front ends, and that was technology driven. But at the same time, we used this opportunity in the Plone community to, as I said, to take this step back and think about what's the core idea of our CMS, right? And that was like, for instance, like the ease of use, right? That we make it really easy for editors to create content, right? And that was like one of our core ideas. So that was driven by technology or by the change in technology. So we had to rewrite the systems, but we tried to incorporate all those problems that I described, right? Like accessibility, consistent corporate design, ease of use, low training costs, and all that, all the experience that we had in the last 10 years, and try to come up with like a new system and that improves the situation on all those fronts, right? And this is what we're currently doing. This is our challenge that we're facing right now, and we're really happy that we're in this accessibility project, so that that accessibility is really a first-class citizen. And I love the discussions that we have with the other open source or commercial contributors to discuss those things, how to improve things there, right? But at the same time, also improve like all the other things that I mentioned.
So Timo, I'm sure you live in Bonn, Germany. I'm also sure that there's a lot of meetups happening in the city to discuss all sorts of technical topics on technology. Now, from now to the moment that someone is going to be able to use this authoring tool, what are your journey? Are you also planning to somehow go into that steps of having meetups, engaging, evangelizing? So tell us the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like 8 years ago, I decided together with my girlfriend to move to Barcelona, to a new city. I didn't like speak Spanish or Catalan for that matter. And the first thing that I did was like, I noticed that there was like one guy who was in the Plone community and he lived in Barcelona. He was actually from Germany, and I never met him, but when I moved there, I contacted him, and he was one of the organizers of the local Python meetup. And I also jumped in, and then at some point we had like 3 meetups at the same time. I think like the Python, the Plone meetup, and the Zope meetup or whatever, right? And today the Python meetup in Barcelona is, I think, among the top 10 of like all Python user groups in the world even. And when I moved back to Bonn, I continued with that. So I founded the Python user group here in Bonn. We have a Plone user group. Then when we moved to JavaScript, I founded the JavaScript meetup here in Bonn, and we are organizing a React Barcamp. So we're really like active in the open source community, and we're doing that a lot. And I go to a lot of like conferences, and I like, tell people about our journey, and I try to get feedback. So this is an important part of my job and what I love doing, right? Like talking to people and like exchanging ideas, showing them what we do, and talk about it. Yeah.
Mike, I know that you, or maybe you're talking right now, but you're talking to yourself. So I was just going to give the mic to you, but.
Sorry, Debra, go ahead.
No, I was just going to make, I know you'd made a comment in the chat window. I wanted to make sure we gave the mic to you.
So I think that the We4Authors project, the We4Authors cluster, is Susanna can definitely speak more to that and the broader plans with the collective of content publishing tools that are involved. I think that there is definitely an effort to try and raise awareness of the project by creating a website, by engaging with social media, by talking in venues like this. It's harder to go off and to have meetups given the pandemic that we're in. I'm not sure when the sort of meetup culture will emerge again, and when people are feeling safe to come back into bars and have conversations, and a lot of people are still not looking for another opportunity to be on Zoom in the day. So I think that there's a question as to whether, how meetups will factor into the future of this, but there's definitely a lot of opportunity to try and bring together different tools. And one of the things that I'm quite hopeful in is that if we can bring together different content tools that have tried to address problems for the authoring environment, we can learn from and evaluate the best practices. We can share what is being done with Plone and Drupal and these other systems, whether it's TinyNCE or CK Editor or what have you, and we can learn from those and try to incorporate those best practices into our own products. And by sharing and engaging with each other and learning and listening from each other, we can do that. And the other thing that I want to keep coming back to is that I think that a lot of the reason that the authoring interface isn't generally addressed is because it's hard work, and it takes a lot of effort to address and to fix the authoring interface. And so it takes a good collective effort to make it happen. Drupal's done all of this interesting work on implementing ATAG in Drupal 8, and there's hundreds of thousands of Drupal 8 websites out there. We haven't, as a community, gotten together to determine whether or not the changes that we've made have actually made a significant improvement to the authoring experience. There hasn't been the space and the time and the energy. We created these ideas, we put them out there. We hope that there's been a difference. We've heard some comments and feedback from people about that, but we don't have real evidence to determine whether or not there has been a substantial improvement. And I think this is the case for every authoring tool out there, is that people put the information out there, they try and see if there's a result, but there's no way yet a study to try and evaluate what are the right approaches around how to actually build an authoring environment that supports authors to create accessible content. But we're getting there now, thanks to Susanna and Funka and the work with the We4Authors cluster. Susanna, did you want to carry on a bit more?
I want to ask a real quick question to the three of you, and Susanna, you start with this, but I think this is a fascinating project, but I am trying to, in my mind, put the pieces together with, I know this is a big conversation, but I would like to understand from the three of you, starting with you, Susanna, what is your best hope for this work that you're doing that would happen? I mean, right now things are so confusing with accessibility. People, like you said, Mike, they don't even know if what they're doing is working or not. And so what do y'all wish that you would accomplish? What do you wish the world would do to get behind you to make this really work? Because I think that is probably going to be very interesting to the audience, because from everything I'm hearing, I want to help, but I'm not exactly still sure how to help.
Well, I think there's two things in this. One is that in this project, we have funding to really make the user testing that Mike is talking about, that I think all the authoring tools have in common, that they do things and they have some features for accessibility, but they also don't know really what is most helpful and not. And we now have the resources to do testing and to sort of prove or at least agree on what is the best practice. So that is one thing, that we can actually help the tool providers that are working with us in this project. And thanks to being here in Access Chat, we can also say that we have the possibility to invite one more subcontractor. So if there is a tool provider out there that is used in the public sector in Europe, then please contact us, because we can still take one more on board and we have funding for that. So end of marketing. And then in the longer run, I mean, what I have promised sort of to the Commission to do for their money is really to disrupt this market. So by working with the market leading tools and making sure that they come up with their best ideas, to try them out with web authors and really make sure that they do meet the user requirements and that they make a difference, and then share this with the world. I hope that all the other tool makers that are not in the project, they will then follow suit, because we have the biggest ones and they will be the front runners, so to speak. So, I mean, what we want to do in this project is really to change the world. That's just my small principle of what I want to do. But I think we can do it, because if we are in agreement and we do good research and good testing, and then we have the best practices, and we have these big players around us, and I mean, they show the way, and then the rest of the market will follow. I'm quite sure.
So I think that we're, as a large IT company with my Atos hat on, are seeing the demand from public sector. The legislation-driven demand is now actually a reality. Let's see how much of it actually gets translated, because it's coming through in all of the RFPs that you see, that public sector, particularly Germany and UK, that I'm particularly keenly aware of. I think that when you say you're doing research, I'm interested into how you're linking up the research on the authoring tools to the need for monitoring as well, because I think the enforcement of the legislation hinges upon the sampling and monitoring of the websites and the output. So what's that linkage, or is there yet to be a link made?
There is no link between the current legislation and the tools, because the legislation is not covering the tools. So there's no, but I mean, the funding is there, but the funding is there because of the legislation. So this is one way of supporting the legislation, so that, some of the accessibility mistakes are not going to happen. Because I mean, nowadays you can buy a good tool or a bad tool, but it's still the competence of the ICT supplier, Atos, or the one building the website. That is where everything happens, because none of the tools are sort of accessible. You just push the button and then whoo, comes up an accessible website. That is not happening. So what we can do is to try to make sure that more is accessible by default, so that the authors cannot do as many mistakes as they do today. And thereby, I think we can really help the implementation of the Web Accessibility Directive that way. Then the enforcement comes with monitoring, but that is a completely different question. This project has nothing to do with the monitoring piece.
So I kind of get that, but I guess the monitoring, if you are able to monitor sites, and you're scanning all of the European sites, and you're able to ascertain which tool was used to create the site, you might then start also gathering really useful data about the effectiveness of the work that you've been doing.
Yes, that is true. And that is what we did in the pilot. We looked at which tools are used most in public sector websites. So the most popular ones, we have the top 30 list. And then we looked at what can they actually do? What is their accessibility by default? So how much are they sort of accessible from, even if the supplier doesn't do anything? So how accessible are they? Sort of the built-in accessibility part. So that was the first part of the research. And now we're trying to actually change the way things are. And it would, of course, be interesting if there were another project then to make sure that we could also measure this, because my sort of next step in this would be for the central procurement, the framework contracts driven by the governments, to say that if you are not, if you haven't implemented these things, these accessibility by default features that we have promoted, then you are not allowed to sell to public sector, or at least it should be much harder for you to sell to public sector. So that would be sort of the next step in this, I believe.
So Mike, I believe you wanted to give a shout out.
Yeah, I'm definitely, there's some interesting CMSs that are out there that are being used by the public sector and the education sector, that I would love to find people who are engaged on their accessibility teams. The Joomla community and the Moodle community are two that I would, I know are doing some interesting work, and it would be great to have them on board and to have their involvement in one way or the other.
Yep, agree.
Yeah.
And Mike, have y'all reached out to the Moodle and to those two communities to see if they want to be part of it? Because it sure seems like any brand wants to be part of this.
I've certainly tried to, and you'd think it'd be really easy to track down who these people are, but it's not easy to find them and to get a response, and I'm not sure exactly why.
Well, maybe we'll maybe we'll tag them and get them engaged this way. So this is why we're doing it. So it's good to know. And you know, one thing, and this is probably a stupid question, but how do all of these efforts tie into the accessibility tools that we see in the market? I know in the United States, we're seeing more and more overlays come, and we're actually having quite a few failures in the United States with tools. And I realize when we say tools, that's a big word. It's a big word, but how does this tie into the supposedly accessibility tools that, you know, are sometimes making things worse, not better?
Well, some of the features that we are going to prototype and test has a connection to not these overlays, but to testing. So we are, I mean, one way of supporting the web authors is to make sure that they can test how accessible things are while they are editing, for example, or they can test the accessibility of a PDF document before it's uploaded, and so on. So some of the features we are going to try out this autumn has to do with testing. So that is, of course, and then of course we will not invent a new testing tool. We will use one of the open source one on the market just to see how the sort of concept works if you build it into the authoring tool. So in that way it does connect in a good way. And also another thing that I would maybe like to add is that there is another call for European research with the deadline next week, which has to do with content creation. So sort of the back office the back end, and the back end for the authoring tool. So what we are focusing on is really that the output of the authoring tool becomes accessible, but there's of course another perspective on this. This is the accessibility for the web authors, that they are also should have the possibility to use the tools with or without disabilities. So there's another sort of step or another perspective that will also be funded some research on soon.
So I'm curious, how can corporations get involved? Because I know I hear so many complaints in the United States from multinational corporations that are trying to do what the accessibility field tells them to do, but just, you know, they just are so confused, and they don't believe that the accessibility industry and community understands what their real needs are. And I know that Neil is going to have to jump to go to another meeting. Sorry to lose Neil, but I just wanted to, when our friend Neil bounces away, we want to make sure that he knew that. But I was just curious, you know, once again, maybe because this is my client base, but it seems like the corporation should really be stepping up and supporting what you're trying to do. And I know, thank goodness Europe is doing this, but I know the States and other countries, I mean, we're all going to benefit from this work. And so it seems like there's some opportunities for others to step up and really support what you're doing too.
Yes, we are open to corporations and organizations, companies from other parts of the world. As long as they are not receiving the EU funding, it's fine for us. They can be observers or, you know, be in the project, but they just can't receive the funding because that is for European countries only. But otherwise, we're happy to have them on board. They're welcome.
So can I presume that you are really interested in creating a community around what you are trying to develop here?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the whole point with this project is sharing knowledge, taking the best ideas, testing them, making sure that we have some kind of de facto standard or best practices, and then make sure that that reaches as big part of the market as possible, so that all authoring tools, hopefully, will use these features, and then stepwise it will become less necessary for the web authors to be accessibility experts. It should be easy for them to publish in an accessible way without having to go through a lot of training. So definitely reach out is extremely important in all European funding projects, but I mean, for this is sort of the target group audience is really the industry. So we really want to build some kind of community around this, absolutely, yes.
It sounds so fascinating.
And we're also planning to present on some specific events. I mean, will they be online or face-to-face, I don't know, but we're trying to make sure that we will also reach the audience where they are, instead of just sort of, we can invite them for webinars, but it's better that we go where they are and present this. So we try to make sure we reach as much of the market as possible.
So do you have a website or something that people can track to find out more about this information? I'm seeing Mike say yes.
Yes, there is a project website, accessibilitycluster.com, I think, .something. I should remember this. Yeah, .com.
I like Neil's picture that he left up. But
there's also the hashtag We4Authors cluster is the hashtag that people are using. So if you want to, if there are questions or things you're doing and been looking for the We4Authors hashtag is definitely a good way to connect with people.
Hi, Candy, can you hear me?
Neil, we can still hear you too. So on the Mike, when you said will you say it again and tell me if it's FOR or the number 4?
Number 4.
Okay, so what is the hashtag? We4Authors. Thank you. Somebody kindly put it in the chat. But this is very exciting, and I think there's a lot that I think we need this, because I know I listen to corporations complain about it because, of course, in the United States, you don't get this right, you get sued, and you get sued not once. I've heard of companies being sued 4, 5, 6 times. And so it's caused a real rift between the community and the corporations trying to actually do this. So I think we need to come up with better solutions. And I know, Mike, you and I have talked about this many times, but it's got to be more at solving the problem at the authoring tool level so that people can actually be successful, instead of as soon as you finish with them and you step out, they've kicked themselves out of compliance in about 2 minutes. So we'll before we close and thank our sponsors and supporters, maybe we could do a little round robin and give y'all some final words. So Timo, why don't we start with you, and we'll do it backwards. We'll go you, Mike, and Susanna, and then we can thank our supporters.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me for the first time, and yeah, I really enjoy talking about this topic and exchanging ideas and everything, because that's the core of what I love and what I like. And what Mike said before about like the authoring tools, community. When I go to meetings, and for instance for a JavaScript meeting, and it's really technical, and I present like something, it's often that that it's hard to explain to people what we do, like building authoring tools, right? Because they're maybe building like web apps or something. And I found out that when I talk to like people like Mike or others in the We4 Authors cluster, that we have far more in common, even though we're using like maybe different programming languages, but we all have the same problems, and we try to like solve them in different ways, and we run into walls and like learn lessons, and it's super interesting to exchange ideas, right, across like borders of programming communities, if you will. And yeah, I really enjoy that. Thanks for having me today.
We've got to have you again. We were impressed.
So I would say that one of the things that we can really do is make some progress in the low-hanging fruit. We haven't been able to do as much to fix the simple accessibility issues. And I think focusing on the authoring tools and the interface and the basic templates, and providing some good solid examples for people to work from, not things that you have to learn about and then apply, but just fixing it at the source, finding those programs that have a solid reputation around accessibility and are already working for this, because we don't need to have millions of web developers reinventing the wheel and looking up accessibility issues. We need to be able to trust that the libraries that everyone is using have some good accessibility defaults built into that. And for that, we need to actually start funding that. So corporations can pony up money and resources to go off and to invest in the tools that they're using to make sure that those tools are as good as possible. And if that's a matter of challenging their vendors and how they manage their contracts, or whether it's investing in their own technical resources in supporting the open source tools that they use, it doesn't really matter, but they need to see the value of investing upstream in those libraries and making sure that those problems are fixed, so that there can be more real collaboration between everyone who's using these common sets of tools.
Yeah, and I just want to add that authoring tools providers and developers really have a key to accessibility. It's extremely important. I think this industry is sometimes forgotten because everyone is focusing on us, the accessibility experts, but we just can't fix this on our own. We need you to help us. So that is why we're reaching out to all the authoring tool providers to join us in this effort. And I also personally really like the collaborative effort here. We have licensed commercial products, we have open source, we have people from many different parts of the world, and they have different views and perspectives, and they work together. And I think that collaborative effort is really what is making these kind of projects so important and also fun, because I mean, we all learn from each other, and ultimately when we share this knowledge, that is when we sort of go forward in accessibility and inclusion.
I agree. And I keep using the hashtag, we're stronger together. We're stronger together. It's very appropriate in the United States right now when we are all worried about being under one flag, but we've got to all solve this together. We've got to solve this together and support the leaders that are trying to solve it. And obviously the three of you are leading that charge, and we've got to support it. So we appreciate what you are doing, and we stand by you. And so thank y'all for your work. Thank y'all for being on the show. And we also want to thank our supporters, because we couldn't do this without you. We've been doing this for 5 years. We're at 5.5 years now. So still not running out of topics. There's a lot of work to do to, as Suzanne had said earlier, change the world, save the world. But I want to thank Barclays Access, Microlink, and MyClearText for always supporting us and making sure that we're fully accessible, and we're staying online and really growing this community. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone else for joining us today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.